Jay Faber is triple board certified. My God, it's a long time in school. He is an adult psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist, a forensic psychiatrist, actually trained at UCLA and then crossed town at the rival USC during the O.J. Simpson trial. So that was really interesting. Wouldn't you want to see his brain? He was another one of my fantasy brains. But of course he didn't do it. So if the glove didn't fit, you have to quit. Jay was also the medical director at Humana for 5 years. He helped us open our Atlanta clinic, and it was just phenomenally helpful. He is now here in Costa Mesa doing a great job, and he spends part of his time doing forensic psychiatry. So he's going to talk about crime and punishment.
Thank you, Dr. Amon. I'm not sure it's working. Okay, now it's working. Okay, so here's the scoop. We've been here all day long, right? Okay. It's sort of funny. It's like I'm talking at Friday night about prison. You know, it's like 6 o'clock and then you get to leave and, you know, can kind of spoil the evening, I guess, in a little bit of way. But anyhow, so Dr. Jay Faber, one other thing, and Christine put this in everyone's little thumb drive. I wrote a book called Escape, okay? Interesting name, hasn't always got the best popularity, but it's a book for prisoners on how to rehab your brain to get out and stay out of the legal system forever. So it can be downloaded at drjfaber.com, www.drjfaber.com as well. But that is in with your packet. So we're going to talk a little bit about SPECT, crime and punishment, and legal things going on. And, you know, when you think about it, it's really a trend. I mean, what Dr. Amon's been talking about, neuroimaging, neuroscience, where things are going. I think we're kind of at the cutting edge, personally, but that's my only opinion. But when you come to thinking about people who make successful decisions, I mean, the people that really do well are those who are able to, one, anticipate the future correctly, okay, and two, and this is just as important, then you have to have the courage to act upon it, okay? So you can come up with a great idea and act about it. You think if you know a stock and if it's going to do well, you put in a good chunk of change and you make money, you've made a good decision, okay? And so when you think about where we're going in neuroscience, okay, for I think the next 10 to 20 years, if not longer, I think this is very applicable. So I had a good friend of mine who had his own medical clinic, and this is about 10 years ago, and he was doing really well. And he told me he was going to close the clinic. I said, "You're going to do what? You're getting a lot of money here, and you're doing well, and the community receives you in a really positive fashion." He says, "I'm looking at the numbers, they're not adding up." Okay, and so he looked at the revenues coming in the stream and saw the decrease, and he got out, and to be honest, he made a good choice. I mean, that brand of medicine has really gone down, and if he would have not sold the clinic when he did, he would have not done so well. So again, it gets down to how do you make good decisions, you know, and part of it is you have to look at the future, right, and then you have to have the courage to kind of act upon it, and we're going to keep that theme going as we go through this whole presentation. So trends, just in general, Peter Glor, interesting person who's written a lot on just the whole science of trends, and he sees trends kind of going through 4 phases. One is you get some person who comes up with an idea, okay, of something that's really interesting, and then with that idea, you suddenly get this sort of collaborative, innovative network, maybe 4 or 5 people that want to work with you, and you start talking on the phone, you discuss cases, and from that, and I'm telling you this for a purpose because you're going to see some trends here as well, that group called the COIN then suddenly becomes a collaborative learning network. They say, hey, you know what? We're really doing well here. Maybe we should form a bigger group, you know, and do something where we can all learn together. And then finally, you get a bunch of other outsiders who join, and it becomes something called a collaborative interest group, which is a nice fancy way of saying some investors, okay, people, venture capitalists saw this learning group, had some pretty cool ideas, and figured out some ways to capitalize on it. So what does this all have to do with things going on? Now, this is just me personally, and when I wrote my book, I put all these in because I start looking at trends myself. Now, one of the things we're seeing is Criminals. Guess what percent of criminals have a substance abuse problem? Who said it? Someone said it. 85%. Okay, pretty close to all of them. 85%. You think about that. If you got those people sober, what would happen to the legal system? Okay? The other thing is head traumas. If you're in prison, what's the likelihood of you having some kind of head trauma?
Very high.
It's like 7 times higher. Okay, and Dr. Eamon's talked about this several times. It's not these are bad people. A lot of them just have bad brains. And would it not make sense to figure out some way how to rehabilitate them? Now, if we keep moving forward here, this is a slide from the journal or the U.S. Bureau of Statistics. And basically, you know, what it looks at is, okay, how many people are going to prison and how much money are we spending? Okay? Because that would kind of tell you a sense of just how much cash we're spending. The red line on this, and I'm not sure if this guy's is a laser, but it probably won't matter. This is the amount of money we're spending on prisons from 1982 to 2006. I don't have the 2010 data, but I did some calculations. I can tell you about how much we're spending. But we've gone up almost 660% in spending on people going to corrections. So you think of the, 3 crimes and you're out, and that whole group and what this has done. But back in 2006, we were spending about $68 billion. Now we're well over 100 and some odd billion dollars per year on prisons. So you take these numbers, add them up, and then look at this. Our U.S. national debt. Okay, as of this past week, we're now at $20.1 trillion. Okay, I mean, huge. And say if you hit 21, that's sort of the cutoff point. Now, who knows? I'm not quite sure, and I'm not a politician, but I do know this. If you were somebody from the government and you came up with some ideas to help, one, have the prison population go down, and two, and I think most importantly, help these people rehabilitate their brains so they don't ever have to go back again, become responsible, working, tax-paying citizens, would the government not want to look at something like this? Okay, so here is part of the trend. And this is when I saw this is when I started saying, maybe we need to write a book and try to figure out how we can help some of these people who are bad brains, or bad people, they've got bad brains. So then I put this in here because this has kind of been my experience from Don Henley, the Eagles, who's to me one of the best lyricists of at least the 20th century, says, there's a fine line between the American dream and the American nightmare. And whenever you start coming up with crazy ideas, okay, that seem constructive along the way, you're probably going to find some surprises that you didn't expect. And we're going to talk about some of these as we deal with this. Okay, so psychoradiology. Has anyone ever heard the term psychoradiology? Okay, yeah, crazy radiologist. Daniel, 2016 article came out in November, who emails all the doctors as soon as it comes out. Okay, and I go, this is an interesting term. Okay, now I want you to think about this. We've got sort of this coin group, okay, people who kind of talk about neuroimaging, all right? And when you kind of think of coins, think of like Amen Clinic, Costa Mesa, Amen Clinic, Atlanta, Amen Clinic, Northern California. Okay, so we got this group. Now all of a sudden, you see something like this, and it came from the Journal of Radiology, okay, well-respected, well-touted journal, and they're now talking about something new called psychoradiology. So you start asking, are we going from a coin group to a collaborative learning group? Okay? And this whole article talks about some very interesting things and then summarizes with this by combining MR imaging, okay, so surface structural imaging with PET, SPECT, magnetoencephalography, and other imaging modalities. Psychoradiology has great promise as a new branch of radiology. Okay, and it's like, whoa, this is great. I go, we may actually be going into the CLN phase. Now, as soon as I saw this, when Daniel sent it, guess what I did? Every attorney I've worked with and whose email I had, they got a copy. Okay? this is where things are kind of starting to go, and you can get more excited, okay, when you see things like this happening on this journey. Okay, so psychoradiology, we've got, SPECT, we've got fMRI, we've got PET, magnetoencephalography, and they've got this new thing called infrared optics. Why would we want to use SPECT? I mean, of all these things, you got fMRI, there's a lot of articles on fMRI right now. Why SPECT? Okay, now, this is my opinion, okay, and it's only my opinion. Dr. Eamon has been doing this for over 26 years. We've got 125,000 scans, so lots of data to back things up. If you look at most of your research, fMRI, if you get a study with 100 people, that's a big study. You got 125,000 scans. Okay, which by the way, when I was working with Humana and I met with Daniel, this was one of the things that, in a good way, shocked me. Okay, and at that time, I think it was like 89,000 scans that we had. So we've got a lot of data to back us up in what we do. fMRIs are nice, but, and I'm sure Dr. Raj, when he's in here, will talk about this, the resolution isn't quite as well. And the fMRIs just went through a big sort of data break. There evidently was some misinterpretation of data, so a lot of the scans, there's some questions about just how accurate they are. PET's another functional imaging you can use, but they're very expensive and cost a lot of money to get. Magnetoencephalography and infrared optics, they're new. There's just not as much data out, okay? So there'll probably be more as time goes on, but for right now, where we're at, my personal opinion is SPECT is a great way to go to give the public information that can give an idea of where these criminals' brains are at and what you can do to actually rehabilitate them. Okay, so we've got specs. Okay, now we're going to go to court. And the big key word in court is, can you use SPECT scans as admissible evidence? Okay, because they're really nice to have, but if you can't bring them into court to use, it's a little bit hard. Now I'm going to throw out a couple concepts here before we get to why I'm bringing all this up. In criminal court, they've got a term called mens rea, which basically means guilty mind. And for attorneys and judges, it's really important. Oftentimes, the sentence is based upon how criminal guilty you were at the time. So there's what's called purposeful guilt, which you knew what you were going to do. You know exactly what you were going to do and what the consequences are, and you're going to do it. So there, the consequences are usually more severe. Then there's the person who just didn't have as much knowledge. Well, I knew it might happen, but I didn't think it'd be this bad. Okay, so they weren't specifically doing something. They kind of did it and they knew, but they never thought they'd get caught. And then there's people who are just plain reckless. They don't care. And then finally, there's the person who's negligent. They just weren't aware of it. Okay, now, why am I bringing this up? When we use, in criminal courts, scans to analyze what that person's mind was like at that specific time, right, when they did the act, it's pretty hard to do, okay? And it's pretty hard to use a scan or even some psychiatric evaluations to do that. The best we have right now is the insanity defense, which is by the interview. But scans right now would have a hard time doing this, okay? So in terms of saying you're guilty or not guilty with mens rea, it's pretty hard. But there are some trends starting within the criminal courts. There's something called diminished capacity, where someone can be accused of a crime, found guilty, but at the time, their mental cognitive functioning was at a point such that they really didn't understand the full mens rea of what they were doing. And so at this level, you might be able to use psychiatric information to help out. Now, there has been some case law, especially with traumatic brain injury, where we've seen courts use SPECT 1 and also be able to diminish the crime because of that individual's state. Second, and this is where I think it's really, really going to be important and applicable, is this whole mitigation phase. Mitigation means you've basically been accused of the crime and you're getting ready for sentencing, and the judge will take other information, including psychiatric information, to make a decision, okay? So they might not punish someone quite as bad because of their state. there's two standards that are used, okay? And I'm putting this up for a purpose, and you'll see as we go here. There's the Dahlberg standard. Okay, so courts, there's federal court, and then there's state courts. Federal courts use the Dahlberg standard, and there's basically 4 criteria, and these are in your slides. I don't want to go through this really slowly, but one, they ask, has the technique been tested? So believe it or not, they have people try to come in the past with new techniques that have never been done to prove somebody's less guilty. One is the technique subject to peer review and publication. Have there been studies on this? 3, is there a known standard of error? What % of people, if you get this test and it's positive, have brain function problems? And then finally, and this is the key, is there a general acceptance in the scientific community? Okay? And that's been the big one the last 10 to 15, 20 years. That's been the challenge. Now, if we look at the Frye standard, which is a state standard, there's only one thing. Has the technique been tested and gained general acceptance in the scientific community? Okay, now think about it for a second. We just saw a psychoradiology article come out in November, okay? There's case law, okay? Cases that they would not allow SPECT in, and they are starting to allow SPECT in. I mean, the future is ripe for neuroscience and law, okay? And when you think of SPECT scans and all the work Dr. Eamon's done for the last 20-some years, it's in a great spot, okay? Now, part of the reason I'm telling you this is something you might want to think about in your own practices and community that might be possible. Okay, so let's move on here. Great book, Neuroimaging and Forensic Psychiatry. If you really want to get into the whole case law and how this sort of evolution is occurring, I'd really encourage you to take a look at this book. They go in and they talk about each kind of brain malformation you could find, from traumatic brain injury to substance abuse to psychosis to mass lesions. And they break down categories and give you an interpretation from case law where they expect specs to be admissible or not admissible just by the type of brain illness you have. So it's really, really fascinating. And whoever wrote this put some time, some thought, energy into it. Okay, so admissible cases, where do we see admissible cases? Civil cases, it's been primarily, so far, traumatic injury. Okay, if you look at the case law that's out there, it's a little bit hard to say someone was depressed because their father said some negative things. But if someone's had a car accident, there's been a lot of civil cases out using SPECT. And we're going to talk about some cases as we go here to show where it can be used. So there's the criminal side, but there's also the civil side where there's some huge, huge opportunities. Okay, so what about your state? I'm not sure, where everyone's from. Of course, this corner, I know where a lot of the people who are visiting are from, but, Nevada, Texas, Georgia, all states use different laws, so it's really important to know what case law they're using to interpret. I can tell you this, most states, at least that I've worked with, they've been much more open and amenable, especially on the civil cases with traumatic brain injury, to allowing SPECT scans to be admissible. So it's something you could check with your malpractice group. They would have some information. You could also maybe call some of your either defense attorneys or your attorneys doing malpractice cases or injury cases. We might be able to give you some information, but it really varies from state to state. So who are appropriate candidates, for this, The big thing we're seeing here are the addictive cases, People who've had their 4th DUI or 5th DUI and they're facing jail time, It's probably not something you want to do with somebody who's had their 1st DUI just because of the cost, and time that they're going to have to spend. But if you're looking at jail time, and you have a choice of either getting a scan, and this is the key, and is the key word, is working sincerely with effort on a plan to rehabilitate your brain or go to jail, what do you think that person's going to do? They become a lot more motivated. A lot of our sexual addiction cases, we've seen come in and we work on a brain plan, go to court, and I'm going to share at least one case where we've seen some things happen. Now, here's the other thing. Most juries, when you go in, for a psychiatrist to come up, or a psychologist, or a mental health therapist, social worker, and to start doing this has some substantiality. But a jury wants to see the problem, okay? When they can see on a scan that's regular and one that's irregular, when you see some of the scans with temporal lobe problems, where you see the big diffusion problems and they got anger issues, it's a powerful statement, okay? And to be quite honest, the attorneys on the opposing side can be somewhat intimidated when they see them, just because of what's there. The other thing I make a point is, and I'm sure Daniel said this already earlier today, and the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law says the same thing. The scans really are used to help corroborate all the information you have. The scan doesn't tell you, it's just another piece to give you guidance on what's going on. Okay, civil cases where we're seeing these traumatic brain injury, ideally you want to have someone who's probably had one traumatic brain injury. I mean, if someone was in a severe car accident when they're age 3, and then they're age 30 and they have another car accident, the opposing attorney is going to say, well, which one is the damage from? So it makes it a little bit more complex, okay? And ideally, the sooner you can get the scan done after the injury, probably the better. Okay, responsibilities, okay, for whoever, and I put forensic psychiatrist, but that's me, but it could be a psychologist, it could be a social worker as well. All this seems kind of redundant, but I'm going to tell you a story here in a second and why I think it's important to know with where just the whole field's going. One is you want to discuss with your attorney. Okay, we see two types of attorneys here. Guess who gives us the most referrals for legal cases?
Defense attorney?
No.
Public defenders.
No.
Prosecutors?
DA?
Family members who've heard about SPECT scans and seen Dr. Raymond on TV saying, oh my gosh, I know my relative has a brain problem. I got to call this attorney up and tell him. Okay, so what do you end up doing? You have to discuss with the attorney. You have to walk through, you have to educate, slowly teach all the intricacies about SPECT scans. You got to get buy-in, okay? So all the information you've heard so far, and we'll hear throughout the rest of the week, is all solid information you can use when you talk with those attorneys that don't even really know about SPECT scans. The other defense attorneys that know, they know. It's a little bit easier. Steve Cobb, who you've worked with a lot and unfortunately couldn't make it today, he knows about scans, so it makes it a little bit easier. So you want to educate the attorney about scans. The other thing you want to do is you want to discuss what you can do and what you can't do. Some attorneys think that if you show a scan, okay, and we had an attorney, someone who was trying to get somebody off of income tax, and you show them the diamond pattern with PTSD, because he had got somebody else with PTSD, just with the diagnosis, had some kind of weird tax way you didn't have to pay your taxes, a loophole, that if you could show you have the diamond pattern, then you're done. I said, well, it's going to probably be a little bit more complicated than that, okay? And the person didn't have the diamond pattern as well, but I still showed the attorney because the person obviously had some emotional problems, how we could probably help that individual out. So the thing is, attorneys have one agenda, right, to win a case, and we've got a couple of agendas. We got to help the attorney, but we also have to be honest about how we help them as well. And so sometimes attorneys, through their own sort of shareholder interest, might encourage you to do or say things that wouldn't be necessarily in your best interest, okay? And we may talk about one case if we have some time with that. Okay, so responsibilities, we gotta go evaluate the patient, no brainer there. We get our scans, okay? I would recommend some neuropsych testing. Okay, we use WebNeuro, which I really like here, our Beck depression inventories, but you may have your own test you want. And then we want to meet with that patient, okay? Go over the scans and discuss them in a language level that they can understand. And then discuss a rehab plan. Here's what you need to do to get your brain better, okay? Now for the criminal cases, we really want to emphasize that because if they don't do it, guess where they're gonna go? They're probably going to jail. Okay, all right, then we write and I put psychiatric legal report, okay? There's a clinical report where you do your chief complaint, history, present illness, your past psychiatric history. The courts don't want all that information. There's a specific format, and I'm not going to go into all here. If you want to grab me afterwards over the weekend, you can, and I can kind of tell you what courts want and how you write your reports, okay? Because it's a whole different kind of animal, okay? But it's fun because in the rationalization part, you really get to write more of a persuasive opinion about it. Once you write your report, you want to discuss it with the attorney. Okay, the attorney might have some ideas, and you can add or subtract depending upon what the issue is. Okay, and I've seen somewhere the issues we aren't going to change. Okay, and then we go to court. Okay, so court. Juries. Picture this. You're a jury of people, okay, and you go into court. How much do you think they're going to know about scans? I mean, kind of think what you guys who've not seen scans, what you're going through, okay? And if you go up and start talking about the overactive basal ganglia, decreased perfusion to the temporal lobe and frontal lobes, and that causes, affect dysregulation, they're not going, no, a thing. So you have to go to court as a teacher, okay? So part of doing this means you're going to be doing a lot of talking, education, and communication at a level that the jurors can understand, okay? So it's an opportunity, from my perspective, to not only teach them, but you learn as you go. You learn how to communicate in a way that helps them understand, and you can understand better. The other thing I think is important is you really, really want to stay calm, especially during cross-examinations, okay? And I'm gonna give you a couple examples of what attorneys can do on the cross-exams, okay, and how to kind of handle some of the pressures they can give. I mean, it's an adversarial system, one. They're out to win, okay, and that's just the way the system is. And the key is really knowing what you can say and what you can't say, and when you feel like you're being tricked, how to kind of handle it, okay? So throw that in there. Okay, now the other thing, and this is really, really important. Okay, so you've got to know your neurophysiology. So all what you're taking in so far this week, okay, you have to know how to take different anatomies and start to put the whole piece of the puzzle together, okay? So for example, if you know someone's got really, really bad perfusion to temporal lobes and their frontal lobes aren't working so well, okay, and the frontal lobes, especially underneath, can act kind of like brakes for emotions, not a great combination, okay? And to be able to say, yeah, they've got temporal lobe problems, but if their frontal lobes aren't working so well, you've really got problems, okay? And you've got to rehab both. So it's a matter, and I'm gonna show you a couple cases where it gets tricky, but it's important, and it's fun because it allows us as professionals to take data, begin to synthesize it, integrate it, and use our own thinking capacity. So we're not just memorizing information and regurgitating it back, we're actually starting to have some fun trying to actually think how this person's brain is working given the data we have in front of us. Okay, now this is a great quote. Todd Skinner, and we're gonna close and we're gonna look at some cases after this. Todd Skinner is a mountain climber, and he wrote a book probably about 10 years ago. And what he says here, I think, is sort of the summation of my experience doing legal work so far, okay? And Todd kind of writes about mountain climbing and then talks about life through that. Okay, and he says, you extend the boundaries of your own relative scale by continually looking for opportunities to move beyond your comfort zone. Now, he's talking about climbing mountains, by not refusing to go where conditions are different than you are used to. An expanded state of relative comfort is an asset to carrying your backpack, and relative comfort, I think, is the key word here, and can be gained not only from your experience, but by observing people who are comfortable when you aren't, okay? A team can take its cue from the most comfortable member, and then this is great, and then raise the scale of that to the level of 1, okay? So really what we're doing, and you're gonna see some cases, and I'll show you some things that can happen, okay, is doing this kind of work. You gotta push yourself, okay? And you've gotta stay on top of literature, and you need to kind of understand how attorneys think, where the legal system's going, okay? And be dynamic and refreshing along the way. So I kind of take that, just kind of closing on the first half of this, is if you're going to do this, it's not always easy, but it's really fun. If you're going to do this, if you make a commitment to put yourself in situations where you're uncomfortable, not where you're doing anything unethical or illegal, but areas where you're striving to grow and understand and dig deeper, you're going to get rewarded, okay, in some huge ways. I'll show you some indirect ways as we look at some of these cases when we go on here. Okay, so any questions so far? I mean, this is sort of the formal part. I'm just looking at my time to see. We've got some good time here. Yes?
So you presented, Dr. Amon told us how difficult it was to get people with a normal brain.
Jake,
for the
when
scan.
somebody asks a question, they need to come up here.
Oh, sorry.
Come on up to the mic.
Christine Barker will get up.
Would you say your email address?
Yeah, it'll be on the end of this talk too,
Okay.
as well, but it's Doc Faber at amenclinic.com. Yes?
Hi, I'm Ingrid Roos from the Netherlands. I'm a pediatrician. Dr. Amon told us that it's very difficult in the general population to find people with a normal brain scan.
Yes.
So I can imagine in prison, that
Oh my gosh.
it's even harder to find a normal brain scan. So
Yeah.
That will mean that most of them have an abnormal brain scan, and that would be a reason for, giving it an excuse for what they've done.
So they use, okay, so they use that as an excuse.
Well, I can imagine.
Right. And so, okay, so imagine you're a judge and you get a healthcare professional, we care, we're kind, and then you get some person who's possibly a manipulator. Okay, so what can you do when you do this? Okay, and we're gonna talk about a few cases, but one thing is this whole brain rehab plan. That person has to follow through
Yes.
and do it.
Yes.
And if he's not going to do it, then what that person's telling you is that the structure you have suggested isn't enough. And because of that, you probably need someplace else to go where there's more structure, which is back to jail. Okay? So that's what you need to tell when we work with the courts, because they're going to assume you are, more of a bleeding, caring person who's just out to try to get people out. We're not trying to get people out. We're just trying to rehabilitate their brains and do it in a way that's going to be safe
Yeah, that's the.
as
yeah,
well.
Yeah.
And if
That's
they're not
actually
going to
what I
follow
all
through,
need. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Yes.
Carmen Getty.
Carmen, hi.
How are you doing?
Good.
Believe it or not, I had the opportunity to, in so many ways, work with forensic.
Yes.
So my question will be that it is a common practice to ask for the inmate or the accused person to go through a psychological forensic evaluation. Is that something a part of the package, and how you have observed the results of those tests comparison with the SPECT scans? So I would like to know if there's any correlation as you have the results of psychological testing and then compare those results with the SPECT's results. Do you see a sort of congruency results?
So our psych testing here, and Daniel would probably have more numerically to add to this. Would the most consistent is our web neural test.
Okay.
So when you look at people's concentration, their memory, and their executive functioning,
Yes.
and then look at their frontal lobes.
Yes, because you have the verbal and the performance tests, et cetera, the results.
Yes.
Plus, you see the brain scan, and then you have a very good correlation in what you're trying to present.
There you go.
Perhaps
Yes.
the court. And in that, I agree with you about treatment and rehabilitation, because really it needs to happen rather than just punishment.
Well, and I'll show you some cases, but yes, exactly.
Okay, now this is going to fall.
Oh no, we don't want it to fall.
It looks
Look at
like
that.
Yeah. So
Maybe. Does that make a
There it
difference?
goes.
There you go. Change the center of balance. There you go. Any other questions? Yes.
So, the system is flawed. The judges only have certain choices. They've got guilty and not guilty. So this knowledge of brain dysfunction, what other options does that give them? I know after they're guilty of minor crimes, maybe there's a diversion program option. But they don't really have the option of saying, well, you're guilty, but because you have a brain injury, we'll send you to rehab instead of jail, which I would love, but they don't have that. So what are kind of our alternatives? How are we actually influencing the judge to give him more options by giving them this information?
So you first of all, you have to have an attorney, defense attorney that will work with you, okay? The mens rea, the guilty phase, there's nothing psychiatrically we can do. It's the mitigation phase, when that judge has to decide what would be in the best interest public for that person, what do we do? Now, the judge, he's got other things on his mind as well. One is, we got $20.1 trillion deficit. If I can get this person in a good brain rehab program on his dollar and not the state's, and be guaranteed he's going to follow through, why not? Now, this would be the other piece you have to think about. If you've got someone who's a violent offender, okay, that adds a whole nother flavor to it.
Okay.
For those who are primarily substance abusers or your sexual addicts, which, by the way, most of those people, besides that problem with their sexual issues, they're normally not violent. They got dependency issues and some passivity issues. So they don't necessarily need to go there if you've got some other plan in place. So the government's strapped to save money, okay? And all we're trying to do is say, you know what, let's make this a win-win rather than a lose-win or a win-lose, and come up with some other creative solutions to, one, help these people rehabilitate their brains, and then two, simultaneously, maybe save our state and country some budget deficit money.
So this is after they're convicted guilty and the judge is deciding sentencing, and if he doesn't feel like he has to actually protect the public, then he might choose to send him into some kind of a rehab.
Yeah.
If he's given good options for that. Maybe
Exactly.
an inpatient and...
Yeah, so so if you have a substance abuser, okay, you're probably going to want to recommend a residential treatment program for a long period of time, okay,
where they're confined.
where they're confined and they're watched, okay, and more than I'd probably recommend for my insurance days, a lot longer than we'd recommend for insurance days, okay, yeah, so you put that in. Now the judge has got to see that, but he's got to say, am I doing something that's safe for the public? All right, now, that all being said, some of the people you see aren't going to like it. Okay, I said, well, what are your options here? Okay, the other thing, I've had one person call me once, because, okay, think of the field, we're mental health people, we got empathy. They called me and said, well, I can't pay for the program, what am I supposed to do? I said, you're going to have to find the money to pay for the program, because if you don't, you're going to have to go back to jail. Well, he found the money for the program.
So the judge can give them those kind of options. I'll send you to rehab if you can pay for it. If you can't, you go to jail. Is that a real option in the court system?
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, and most people, when you throw that out, I mean, and there are programs. I mean, Atlanta, we found a couple programs, right? We got MAR, which we, there's programs out there. It's just a matter of getting creative,
Right.
And the substance abusers, we already know they're creative, right?
Yeah.
So we
Fine.
just kind of team up with your creativity and ours, and you play with them, but that's kind of how you get buy-in with them too.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Come on up.
So my name's Lisa, and I did 17 years child and family. I actually graduated from the University of Hawaii in Manila, and I did juvenile probation over there for years, so we'll talk later. So with juveniles with residential treatment, a lot of times the judges don't want to send the kids to jail,
Right.
but they got to have the option. So this is a very simple option of having the holistic approach, putting the kid in a residential treatment facility where the staff there can do all the steps that need to be done, work with the family or not, but then they're healthier. So they're not going to jail, and they can go out and go to that next level and get a job and turn 18 and be a better citizen. And then also I see it, just with my experience with kids, is if they do go to juvenile facilities, this is a great treatment plan for when they come out on parole. Because they're going to be monitored, they're going to have a probation officer, a parole officer. Hey, are you doing the plan and the steps and meeting with people and doing what you're supposed to do? So giving them options and holding them accountable to do their treatment.
And it's amazing when people see their pictures.
Yeah.
It can be a very powerful moment. Yes, one more question, and then we'll go on from there.
Two cases like this that are closer than clients. These are two people who
Yes.
actually worked in my practice in the facility.
Uh-huh.
And the one guy is up for murder right now. It was an accident, a gun accident, that's what I'm calling it. Because I know he didn't go out and decide to shoot someone. And the power behind this is so unbelievable, because it just took me writing a letter to the judge, letting him know that this is starting to get integrated into my practice. And he let him out on his bail to come back and work in my office. And as a clinician, I was a little bit nervous about that. You know, something now I'm going to be more responsible for something that I'm feeling out of that comfort zone. And I have another client who is up for a cocaine, was picked up on cocaine, and he's not been accused of this yet, but he was put away. You know, they just speculated that he was in on the deal.
Yep.
And we were able to make a phone call. I made a phone call to the bail folks and said, what happens if we get him out and, you know, and he leaves or whatever? Within 15 minutes in North Carolina, because he has a mental health diagnosis, he was just let back out on the street because we let them know that there's a brain rehab program that he's working in. So the power behind this is so incredible, at least in our state. But
What state are
organizing
you in?
it, North Carolina.
North Carolina, okay.
Because the
Yeah.
mental health system is so backed up with the criminals in the emergency rooms.
Yeah, you're from a broader perspective, it's an interesting conversation.
My
and a
question
lot to
earlier
do.
was wondering, why can't we get our emergency rooms to do the spec imaging? Why can't we get those doctors to be a part of this in the community?
Well, yeah, so look at the journey.
Right.
We're kind of at, to me,
We are at a tipping point.
we're at that CLN point from my perspective. You know, Daniel, he may even have a better idea where things are, but that's just my opinion. So wait, because I think you're going to see
A few
changes.
ideas about how to collaborate community, so I like to talk with them.
Yeah,
Thank
you bet. Okay, let's go on. Let's do some cases, okay? You guys want to see some cases? So what we're doing now, you think of all the information we've got so far, okay? And we're going to try to start to use it and have some fun and look at some cases, okay? All right, so, and I'm going to grab my watch because I want to make sure we use our time wisely here since we don't have that up. Okay, so we got about 45 minutes. Okay, this is a 35-year-old divorced male. Okay, this is from the Panhandle of Florida. All right, when you think of Panhandle of Florida, okay, it's a little bit more on the conservative side, right? Think of like red pickup trucks, you know, and shotguns in the back. And once you do something, you're in big, trouble, okay? All right. And we saw this person, he had a history of drinking excess alcohol, and he was using a lot of Valium. He had 3 DUIs in the past. He'd been working on this merchant ship, and he'd get really lonely, and so the way he kind of dealt with his loneliness was to drink. Well, when he got home after a long trip, he decided to take some Valium, and then after taking the Valium, he drove his car and apparently hit another car, okay, and then tried to escape. Okay, so he got hit and run, 4th DUI, state of Florida. This guy's facing jail time, okay? And so his attorney called me and said, can you help? And I said, well, have him come up, we'll get a scan, and we'll see what we can do in Florida. All right, so now this is one of the easier cases. So here is his sort of story. Now here's his scans. We've got his resting scan on the left, on your left too, and the active on the right. So Any thoughts or comments, I mean, from what you've got so far?
Kind of lumpy. Temporal lobe.
Was he under the influence by the time that he was arrested and when that?
He was under the influence, yeah.
And then because he ran, is that right? You said that he.
He took off, yeah, so he took off,
Yes.
okay.
And so therefore, my question will be, I'm sorry, I don't know, but my question will be, knowing the alcohol issue there, I would like to know how long has been the alcohol usage to see how it's affected in the brain.
Okay, so looking at some of this,
Could you repeat the question?
how long had this guy been using drugs and alcohol for? Okay, now he's 35 years old. Okay, so older we get, we all lose some neurons, so our brain gets a little bit bumpy. Okay, but this guy's 35 years old.
I can see that.
Is this normal? Okay, look at this. We should have this nice smooth ellipse going around here. Look at his longitudinal fissure right here. Look at how flat this is. I mean, so this guy's been doing some drinking. Okay, yeah. Now, here's another thing you have to think about, and I told him this. If we got problems in our frontal lobes, I'm sorry, if we have problems with our frontal lobes here, okay, what happens to our decision-making capacity? Okay, so you know, you're sober for 3 months, you feel pretty good, Jeff calls you up and says, hey, let's go play some pool at Jack's Bar. And you say, well, I've been sober, I've been seeing my sponsor, I won't drink. What happens?
You drink again.
They go out and they drink again. And what do they say? What do they say to themselves?
Just one drink.
One drink, and how many do they have? 10. And then they come home the next day, what do they say to themselves?
Shouldn't have done it.
What the heck is wrong with?
I mean, but he
Your
also
core.
has been taking Valium.
He's taking Valium,
Problem.
which is toxic as well. Okay, so we got some problems there. He needs his frontal lobes, we know for sure, rehabilitated. Okay? He needs to stay away from alcohol and drugs. Okay? In other words, he's probably going to need a residential treatment program for that to occur for a while. Okay? Then we look at his underside. Okay? Basal ganglia. Okay, what calms basal ganglia down? Okay. Alcohol. Valium. Pot. Okay, and pain pills. And they do a great job.
Thank you.
They do a great job. The problem is, and I'll tell the patients this, they're addictive, one, right? And two, they're toxic to your cortex. Look what it's doing. Okay, so we got to figure out something else to give you, okay, besides Valium or booze to kind of help this out. Okay, so this is where when you talk with the patient, you start working on a brain rehab to try to help him. We gave him some of our GABA calm, okay? So benzos, right? You think of Ativan, Xanax. What do they bind to? The GABA receptor. We find if you just give GABA, non-addictive, right? Okay, not toxic to your cortex, kind of calms these down. All right. Okay, so lonely, depression, okay, drinking. We got to help these parts of his brain out as well, okay? So when I write my report to the judge, you know, in my recommendations for treatment, I put all this in here, okay? And that patient has to follow through, or he needs more structure and can't work a plan outside of a residence treatment program. Yes?
Could you just state what your read is for some of us that haven't read much of these before? I haven't read many of these. And could you just state what your read is?
Yeah, so good question. The big things on this gentleman's scan, basal ganglia. We should have two little red dots here at his age. They're really white. So higher association with anxiety, nervousness.
Decreased or increased?
Increased, I'm sorry if I said decreased. Increased basal ganglia activity, higher association with anxiety, nervousness, worry, okay? One thing that calms that down is drinking, okay? Or benzodiazepines. The problem is that they're addictive and we need to find other things that help. So I'm kind of wording it to how I can tell the jury, okay, or the judge, so they can start to put the pieces together, Okay? So he's got his basal ganglia, and then his thalamus is just on fire. Your thalamus, higher activity in your thalamus, okay? Higher association with depression, more of an apathetic, kind of who cares depression. You might not feel like you're loved. We see a lot of negativity here as well, okay? Now here's another thing I see a lot, okay, is you've got somebody who's come into my office, married for 14 years, all right, and they're having sex with multiple partners, okay, and this is a true story. He's able to kind of keep himself together, okay, but then he goes out of town for sales meetings, and the first thing he's doing is looking online, and the next thing calling girls up. He says, what's wrong with me, okay? Now this guy had this, okay, needs a sense of feeling love, being around people, and then, hope I'm going the right way here, no. He had huge, huge frontal lobe gaps. So his ability to say, hey, right now I'm feeling lonely, I can't deal with it, he couldn't tolerate it. And so his behavior led to him doing some pretty addictive things. Now this guy didn't have legal problems, but I can tell you other cases with people with sexual addictions where we've seen that pattern. Okay, so this is where you start putting neurophysiology together too, right? You don't just look at one area and say this, you start looking at several saying, how is this person's brain working and what behaviors is that leading to?
Did you say
Yes.
you can't deal with feeling lonely or can't admit it or can't live with it?
When our thalamus is,
Can't.
when our thalamus is elevated,
Elevated.
we tend to have more depression, apathy, negativity. Okay, so being alone might be more painful. Okay, so if you get around people, you feel love. How do you get love? Okay, one is by physical intimacy, right? Okay. All right, now, long story short, wrote the report. I didn't even have to go to court, which I thought I would have to and, testify. The judge read the report, and they put the guy in a residential treatment center in the panhandle of Florida. Okay? So, I mean, powerful. That doesn't happen much. We were surprised, okay, for that to happen. Yes?
What length of time did you recommend for residential treatment?
6 months for him. 6 months.
Did you medicate him too?
I did not initially use medications, but when I write the report, I usually make recommendations. Like he was depressed. SAMe supplement can help here. Betaine supplement can support here. But medications that increase norepinephrine, like Wellbutrin, Cymbalta, Effexor, Prestique, and the new one, Fetsima, can be used as well. I wasn't following him after that, so when I write the report, I put those in so if a psychiatrist or doctor gets a hold of it, they'll know what else can be used if he remains depressed.
What about the fact that his AC gets more active when he is in an active phase?
Okay, so active phase, okay, if your AC gets more active when you're more alert, okay, you might be more likely to get stuck on thoughts. So if you get a thought about alcohol, that might stay longer, okay? And you might be more apt to drink.
So that would be a 5-HTP indicator.
5-HTP,
Or Prozac.
Prozac, Celexa, saffron. We love saffron a lot here. We're seeing a lot of data come out about that. So yeah.
Neurotic.
I'm sorry, what else?
I'm sorry. The medication to help them with neurotic.
Neurontin helps your basal ganglia, supports basal ganglia, and your temporal lobes too. Okay, good. So you guys are starting to kind of put some of this. So you can see how creative, and this is how you work through cases. You start playing and thinking what possible scenarios are there. Okay, yes?
But you don't know what the result was. Have you followed any of the cases?
I am the forensic psychiatrist, okay?
Right.
So my job is not treating psychiatrist.
Yep.
They come to me to do the evaluation, which I do. So I'm not sure what happened to him after he went to the residential treatment program.
Have you done any studies about this to see what because the thing that's going to be supportive of your continuing to do it and being successful would be the study that shows the outcome with some of these people longer term,
Can I
right?
answer that?
Yes.
I've been working in addictions for the last 15 years.
respond to
You want me in the phone? Okay. Michael? Oh, you
Oh,
want to
I'm
answer?
sorry. I just want to respond to Jenny's question. because we do a formal outcome study on everybody we see. And often people are here because they have a domestic violence charge. I think court is not uncommon for the people at Amen Clinics. Where's Crystal? So Crystal, would you agree with me that people coming here for court reasons is not an uncommon occurrence? It's not an uncommon occurrence. And I want to tell you my favorite story, since you asked for a story. His name was Ryan. He came to us in an orange jumpsuit. He was in juvenile court, and he was a mess. He had broken into someone else's home. He had run away from home. He, as Trump would say, he was a disaster. So we scanned him. We treated him. And he just did everything we asked him to do. And his mom was so grateful. And about 6 years later, I got the most heartbreaking letter from his mother, who said, and she sent me a picture of him, that he had died as a hero in Iraq doing what he loved. And she said, rather than feel like a bad boy, which he had, is that he was doing what he loved and he died with honor. And it's not an uncommon story for us, that our hope is we prevent crimes by treating people effectively than just judging them as bad and hoping somehow the bad food, sleep deprivation, hanging out with bad people, or people who do bad things will somehow rehabilitate them. You know, it'll shock them into being better. So we have actually all of our records on our criminals, because, you know, we keep those kinds of things. And our outcomes seem to be about the same as the rest of the story. And you must have a story like that.
Oh, we had one person, and Gigi can probably remember this. A mother brought in her 31-year-old child who'd been living on the streets selling drugs, and the last place he wanted to be was with us. And so he came in, and part of my job is just to see what their level of change is at, and his was probably more in a pre-contemplative at best stage. Well, when he saw scans and saw the bumps and holes from all the drugs he was using, he got one of these OMG moments and started seeing, well, maybe this is more serious than I think. So he left and came back a month later and said, I've been following the plan. And I go, I'm really kind of surprised. And I said, well, tell me more. He says, well, I haven't used any drugs. I said, fantastic. And I'm starting to look for work. I'm staying at my mom's house. I said, that's fantastic. So I said, well, what made you stay sober? He says, well, the pictures, one. He says, two, I started losing weight. So the whole just numbers, you start following things. I said, let's adjust. He was still a bit anxious, so he adjusted his supplements. Came back 2 months later, had found a job at a gym, and also was looking to become a certified trainer. 2 months later, came back, was doing a certified trainer. 6 months, he came in and says, you know what? He says, I'm doing certified training, and now I'm thinking of becoming a Navy SEAL. Okay, now, if you're a parent, 6 months before that, your kid's living on the street, no motivation to change, and now he wants to become a Navy SEAL. Okay, and so that's a story. I mean, and we get those comments. Okay, yes, thank you. Okay, let's kind of move on here. We're going to go through, I've got 4 cases. I want to go to case number 3 because I like this case better. Okay, so this is a doctor who brought his 17-year-old Caucasian male to come see me. This kid had some focusing problems. He was in a really, really severe car accident at age 8. The car evidently was hit and flipped. He saw his mom and dad flip out of the car, okay? and he was bleeding and bruised. He can't remember if he was conscious or not, but after he got back to school, he was a straight A student. His grades started going down. He started getting B's and C's as opposed to A's. His parents need to get him a tutor, okay? And then he was just gaining weight, and so his parents brought him to his doctor, and his thyroid hormone and his growth hormone were both low. So, and this is kind of where, for the psychiatrist piece, we got to think where medicine's going, okay? So what's kind of in the middle of our brain? Okay, yeah, so our pituitary gland. So if you get hit, guess what else gets hit? Okay, and so you start thinking about LH and FSH, and you got to start thinking about testosterone. You got to think about estrogen or progesterone if you're female, thyroid hormone, growth hormone, okay, aldosterone. All those hormones, okay, can get messed up. So as a psychiatrist, we get to expand, we get to feel uncomfortable, learn about other medicines. So anyhow, he had to get treatment for both of those as well. Just as an aside, he had gluten and wheat allergies, and I'll tell you why I'm bringing that up. An MRI was done at the time of the accident, normal, no problems. And then his father, 9 years later, says, you know what? I go, I'm not happy with how my son's doing, and I want to see legally if we can do anything. So he calls me and says, what do you think I should do? I kind of gave him the pluses and minuses of the whole case. And he says, okay, I'm going to get an attorney. I'm going to sue the person who hit my son, who hit us in the car. He was still angry about it. So he got his attorney, and then his attorney started doing the case. And then on a Saturday, this is like Saturday at 7. Okay, now I'm trying to have some relaxation time, and I get this in my emails. I checked my business emails on a Saturday, and I get, Dr. Faber, please read the brief I just received from the opposing side. And this is from the dad. It says several critical things about Dr. Amen, you, and SPECT scanning, as well as he disagrees with your conclusions. I assume you have experience countering these arguments. The mediation is on Tuesday, so any advice would be helpful. So the dad's getting real anxious, okay? And he's a physician, and I get this. So again, at the time, it's like, what do you do? I mean, I'll be honest. It's like, I'm not sure what my first answer is going to be. It's like, you got to think about these. We're climbing the mountain like Todd Skimmer. We're uncomfortable, but let your mind work through. So I thought about it for an hour or two, and then I sent the dad this back. Good evening. I didn't put the dad's name is there. Thanks for sending the email. Here are a couple of my thoughts. First, I will leave most of the reading and arguments to Mr. and that's the attorney, as he's the expert in these legal cases. So, however, there's a few points to think about. First, the opposing attorney is right. I'm not a neurologist. Now, he was criticizing me because he read the report and thought I did the neuroradiology scan, which we don't do. We have a neuroradiologist do that. I said, I'm not a neurologist or neuroradiologist, but I am not the one who wrote the final report scan. A board-certified neuroradiologist wrote these findings after reviewing the scans, not myself. Had the attorney taken the time to review, and I put in bold letters, all of the records, he certainly would have been able to resolve that concern himself. Okay? Thank you very much. Okay, second, okay, and this gets to Dr. You haven't seen this one yet. Second, TBI and SPECT scans have been found to be admissible in courts of law. This is not the case for other types of functional neuroimaging. The attorney can argue about Dr. Amen, whose name, by the way, was spelled incorrectly throughout the report, okay? But it is really not about him. It is about data supporting the use of SPECT scans with traumatic brain injury. Courts of law have stated that SPECT meets legal standards to be admissible when dealing with TBI. Now, and I put this in parentheses, Fry and Dobert standards, which Mr. Glickman is well aware. So now when I bring up these little things, okay, they're applicable. You can use the verbiage, to make a point, okay? Finally, okay, if there's any doubt about the credibility of Dr. Amen, okay, because this attorney really went on. One of his recent research articles was on TBI versus PTSD using SPECT to differentiate these conditions, was ranked to be the 19th best scientific article by Discover magazine in 2015. Okay? Should such an individual be so disreputable, why would a nationally respected scientific magazine be giving him such high status? Moreover, there's lots of other articles about SPECT and TBI. Okay? See, this is where you have to start using a lot of street sense, because this is all new territory. I encouraged, the dad wanted to get it, he wanted to blame me if it didn't work out. So I sent the dad this, okay? And to be honest, I didn't know what I was gonna write, okay? I believed in what I was doing, all right? But this is the kind of stuff you're gonna see when you do this kind of work. We're all kind of like pioneers, okay? And if you're up for the challenge, it's actually kind of fun, as long as you believe in what you're doing. Okay, so here's this kid's scans. The dad only wanted to get an active scan, okay, and a surface scan. So I'm sorry for blocking your way here, okay. I've got our cortical here and our below surface picture here. Okay, now I'm doing this one for a reason. Okay, looking at his cortical scan, okay, these are artifacts, by the way, those little like chips that look like they're falling off. What do you see? It means that the machine made a boo-boo, so to speak, okay? It's kind of hard, too, to see this on here, okay? But it's mild. Everything on here but is mild, and that's why I'm bringing this up. Okay. Okay, so frontal lobe, temporal lobe. Got some bumps here. Kind of right in the central part of frontal lobe. Central temporal pile, kind of smooth. And then over here, can you guys see these bumps? It's got some bumps here. So these are all like mild bumps. They're not like huge. Can't see. Now I'm going to switch to the other side. Sorry about that. Okay, so this guy more than likely hit his head on his, let me think here, the way I hypothesized it, on his left side, and then whiplashed over to the right, so he kind of had a contra coup injury, okay? That happened, but it's very mild. It's not some of the severe ones. I mean, we've seen people with huge bumps and holes, and it's like, well, what's going on? I mean, why is this kid having all these focus problems?
Looks like cerebellum to me.
His cerebellum
Inactive in the subcortical, and there's a few holes in the cortical.
Okay, so where do you see the holes in the cortical?
The upper left cortical. I think those artifacts on the bottom.
These?
Yeah.
These here are artifacts. Unless, Dan, you got a better idea what those are.
They look like
Yeah, it's not the machine made a boo-boo, though. It's
Somebody moved?
It's just uptake outside of the brain.
Brain.
So that's artifact. See right here, you can see the narrowing, like hurt here. That's not normal because it sits in the temporal cavity. So boom, hit the front, hit the back, and vibrate. It's a little on the bumpy side because he's a kid, right? He's like 17. So you want to make sure he's not smoking pot.
And he's not, he's a good,
Right.
not smoking pot.
But he's probably really anxious and has trouble letting go of negative thoughts. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, no, I agree with you. It's mild.
Yeah, it's mild. So you got this mild, but then it's like, why is this kid having such a hard time in school all of a sudden? Okay, now you think of your cortex acting like brakes, kind of keeping things feeling-wise controlled underneath. Basal ganglia, anxious. If you're anxious, guess how easy it is to focus? It's harder. His anterior cingulate, getting stuck on thoughts, daydreaming, not being able to pay attention, huge. And then even here is insular cortex and temporal lobes, so some frustration, irritability. Okay, if you're studying, it's hard. If you're frustrated, guess what? You can't pay attention as well. Okay, so he had some damage, and this is my interpretation, to his cortex. But when that happened, some of the brakes that calmed this down couldn't help. And as a result, his grades went down in school. Okay, now, just as an aside, his dad had scans, and dad's looked real similar to this. So there might be some genetic things going on as well. Okay.
Could it be also that he's a minor and the brain is still in full development, that it may not be such a very significant level of problem because that, being a child?
So his brain might be more active because he's a child? That's a good question, but your brain as your child is more active, But for a 17-year-old, and we have like our scans broken up per age for the subcortical, this is still way too active for a 17-year-old. Okay? So again, you think of physiology here and try to figure what's going on. Now, when we did this, and we had the lawyers come in, and I got cross-examined, for 35 minutes, the attorney's asking me about Dad. And if Dad's anxious, Dad's irritable. I said, well, yes, he told me he has a history of that. Well, what son? Is son anxious? Is son irritable? You know? And so the opposing attorneys trying to make a case that, you know what, this is genetic. It's like father, like son. Okay? And he went for this scan first. Okay? So when he got done, he says, well, what does this have to do with head trauma? It looks like Dad and son are like the same. I said, well, yeah, I think you're right. They are the same. And I really do. I think they're the same. The problem, though, is somebody took some hits to the brain and can't control this as well as he had before. And because of that, he's had problems. Okay, and now this is where you use scans as corroborating evidence. Moreover, he's got other problems. His growth hormone, which you never really see decreased all of a sudden at age 8, and thyroid hormone decreased, which be evidence of a pituitary problem. He's got hypopituitarism. His pituitary gland got hit as well. Okay, now unfortunately, we can't pick up pituitary glands on our scans. I go third, his grades went down. Okay, this was a good kid. And how else can you put the whole pieces of the puzzle together besides the fact that he took a hit to the head, 1, 2, his hormone levels went down, and 3, he's got scans that show someone's taken a hit to the head. Okay, now this one's still going along, but I'm gonna tell you right now, I'd be surprised if this doesn't turn out in favor of the plaintiff in what he's going through, okay?
Is there a beginning of a ring of fire going on there?
Well, no, that's a good question. Okay, so remember when I put in the whole gluten and casein sensitivity? So ring of fire, okay, so you start asking is what did this kid look like maybe at age 8? And maybe he's got a few areas of blue hair, but he could have, especially early, a ring of fire. So some of this might be food allergies as well. So ring of fire is associated with food allergies. How much time are you at, Kristen? 15 minutes, okay.
I thought it was PTSD.
That's the diamond.
Diamond patterns associated with PTSD. Yeah. Okay? Yeah, so we'll see where this case goes. Now, on the other head trauma case, we'll go back to 2 here for a second, and then I think we'll leave it open for questions. All right, so here's a medical student, 29 years old, Caucasian female, pre-med student, 4.0 GPA. Through her junior year, right around Christmas time, got hit and had whiplash, went back to school, was crying, tearful, anxious. Her grades went from A's to B's and C's, so she's passing, right? But she's a pre-med student. She's got to get straight A's. She eventually had to drop out of school. An MRI was done, okay, normal, okay? There were no neurological filings. She finally had to drop out of school. They were thinking about 3 years before seeing me suing, but they didn't have any evidence. So I thought they'd come us and get a scan to see if anything showed up different. And so there's where we at. After she finally graduated, she never passed her MCAT tests as well. So that's her story. And then here's her scans. Here's her cortical scans, resting and active. Okay, anyone want to make any comments? I could do all the pointing, but if you want you guys to kind of have some fun here thinking too, like you're doing these cases like I do.
It's active.
Okay, so it's worse when it's active.
It's got holes up in the frontal lobe.
She's got holes up here in the frontal lobe, so maybe jumping from topic to topic a little bit. Got these holes under parietal area, okay?
Temporal asymmetry.
You see the bump here? A little bump here, okay? So she's had some kind of hit to her head, okay? Is this like a severe? We've seen big, I mean, sometimes we'll see huge holes, black spots. No, but she's had something happen to her, Okay, so we get this, and then when we look at her below surface pictures, what do you guys see? So who's getting anxious now? Okay, all that cortex she was using before to get straight A's, okay? She can't do it. Temporal lobe, frustration, irritability. If we're frustrated, how easy to study? Look at her anterior cingulate. Look when her brain gets active. Look, I mean, how do you study with this? Okay, so she probably had enough cognitive cerebral capacity before the accident, but afterwards, she couldn't do it. Okay? Okay, so that was here's the case. Now I gotta write my report. She's got report said mild head trauma, okay? But what do you write? You know, and so this is where you have to get into the whole pathophysiology, looking at all the scans and start painting a picture together why she couldn't do as well in school. Okay, so we did this, okay? This is back in Georgia. And this is where the attorneys get really interesting, is the attorney, the opposing attorney, when we went through the cross-examination says, well, would it be important to you to know that this patient had dropped out of 2 of her classes prior to the accident? It wasn't just after her accident. Okay, so I said, well, and in my back of my mind I'm saying, well, I go, why don't you tell me this? You know, maybe she is lying, you know? I mean, you see all sorts of stuff. I said, well, yeah, it would be important to know. Well, would it have changed your opinion had you known that? And it could have. You don't say yes because you don't know the whole story yet. It could have. Okay, so this is where you got to stay calm until you get all the information. Is there anything else you'd want to know? I said, well, I'd just like to know the context. What happened? Would it change your opinion? Not necessarily, because I don't know the whole story. Okay, so long story short, afterwards I called her. I said, what the heck happened? You know, because people do not always tell the truth. And she says, well, my grandmother passed away, and I had to help my parents with funeral proceedings. And so the only way I could do that, because I was upset, is to stop those 2 classes. But I went back and took them the next semester and did fine. Okay, but see, this is where, when you're getting cross-examined, this is the kind of stuff you get hit. Now, she won her case. Okay, she had the MRI, nothing. We got the SPECT scan, really mild compared to some findings, but she won. Okay, and she's doing well now. She was getting back to taking her MCAT, but then she didn't even want to do it. She thought she just wanted to do lab work. She was kind of tired of the whole doctor thing. So she's doing fine.